vincontroller.eu. Check vehicle history for every used car in Europe. Hello and welcome to another Boostmania International video. Today we're back at JapGarage and there's a lot of interesting stuff left to do. Today we'll be helping. No, we'll just do the whole job. Today we'll get our hands dirty. Or do you want to be the cameraman? Yeah, probably. I like to keep myself clean. If you'd like to know what we're going to do today, well, we're counting on it since you clicked on the video already. But anyways, today we're going to disassemble the Toyota Corolla TS engine. And I might have told you we are going to disassemble it, but actually Zdeno from JapGarage is going to, because he knows these engines pretty well. But today we're going to take a look at how an engine with 300k on a clock looks like. And this is pretty exciting for me because I've not seen many engines from the inside. It's almost like being present during surgery. And if you look behind us, it's really clean as a surgical room. That's because this is a new part of the building. I'm looking forward to making many videos in here because it looks pretty nice. There's plenty of space and it's a really nice environment. Let's hope this is not our last project we're doing with them. Oh, and there's one more thing. We were trying to figure out how to increase the horsepower, because many of you have asked us if it's even legally possible. Joseph is now going to grab the special part, because we got convinced we need this in our car. Just look at this nice cute snail. This one is going in the car. But okay, enough fun. There's no way we could make that work legally. But enough messing around, it's time to start what we came here for. All we have to do is call the master surgeon, Zdeno. Alright, so we're currently standing next to the engine with Zdeno. So please remind us what was done to this engine since we pulled it out of the car. So, this is the Corolla's engine, just like the Japanese man created it. The only thing missing is the transmission, clutch and the flywheel. We put it on an engine stand today so that you can all see that a disassembly of an engine is really not that easy. It's not just the valve cover or the cylinder head, you also have to think about the exhaust and intake, along with many electrical and vacuum lines. So this is just how it came out of the car. Almost, it's just missing the transmission, flywheel and a clutch. And that's because we need to mount it to an engine stand somehow. So I'll probably start by disconnecting all the vacuum lines and all the other cooling and oil lines. We also prepared these boxes to catch some fluids. Firstly, we'll remove all the lines, then electronics, and then we'll continue with exhaust headers. Then the intake, alternator, and basically everything that's not part of the engine block. And then we can start the block disassembly. As you can see, we took off all the cables, and I can tell you there's a whole lot to take off this engine. Is there something people should be careful about? You always have to be very careful with old plastic connectors. Especially take care when you're taking them off. This is actually a very small engine harness. But don't worry, I'll go through it and try to explain it. This whole bit goes through the firewall to the dashboard. That's where it's connected to the engine's computer. Then we have this part of the harness, which is the ignition coil line. Next up is the fuel injection line, and then we have the EGR system and some temperature sensors. This whole branch is responsible for the engine starter. And here you can see the battery connection terminals, both the positive and negative. Next up is the alternator branch. That's basically the whole engine harness. How are the connectors on this engine? Do they need to be replaced? Well, so far, every single connector survived. But with Japanese brands, it seems to be a rule that if you're really careful, you won't break them. But when you put it in back together, it's really important to clean them thoroughly and to lubricate the O-ring inside. That's the only piece that keeps it waterproof. Just look at this connector, for example. It's completely dirty and nasty on the outside, but if you look at the inside, it's nice and clean. These usually only give you problems when disassembling the engine. You have to be careful with the safety catch, otherwise you might break it. Well, we found an interesting thing here. Something called this engine its home. There's fur, feathers, and basically everything else you can think of. It's actually more common than you think. Many of the engines we work on here have some fur or some feathers on them. Thank God the cables are not eaten through. They like the taste of O2 sensor cables the most. That's because cornstarch is usually used on the shielding of the cables. Animals like that smell. Here we have a fuel line that's connected to this fuel rail. We also have this piece of isolation in here, but we have to be very careful not to damage it. Off you go. And here you can see the whole fuel rail, along with all the injectors from first to fourth. We have to pull this out really carefully to avoid damaging any of the injectors. And now we can have a closer look at it. Actually, considering the mileage this engine has done, well, this is not a direct injection engine, so the injector is not in the cylinder, but still, they look really clean considering the mileage. But here you can see the O-rings, and you can see all of them are cracked. So, we finally passed injectors, and we're moving on to another part. Well, after removing the fuel system from the engine, we've also unbolted the intake manifold. The throttle body stays connected to the intake manifold for now. All the intake manifold bolts have been loosened already, so we can slowly start taking it off. Well, let's hope it comes off. I have no idea, we'll see. I have to be gentle though. So, the intake manifold is now fully off, and if we look through the intake routes, we can see all 8 intake valves. Visually, they're looking really nice, but we still have to measure everything after we disassemble the cylinder head. Right here, we have a nice rusty exhaust bolt. But don't worry, we have a nice tool for that. We just put the bolt extractor over the bolt, and we'll see whether it grabs the bolt nicely. And now we can try to loosen it. Alright, so it just took all the rust off and it's no longer grabbing the bolt. If you look at the bolt, it's completely rusted through. Let me grab a size smaller tool. Wow, this tool works awesomely. Yeah, it nicely bit the bolt, and we can take it out. The next step is the exhaust header. All the EGR lines, along with the EGR system, have to go as well. And if you look in here, you can see how they just quickly designed an EGR solution. It looks like they just welded a pipe to the headers. I'm guessing they just drilled a small hole to connect this pipe, but we'll see that once we disassemble it. They just added a pipe that goes around the engine that works as an EGR system. I've loosened all the EGR lines, along with the exhaust headers, so now we can try and gently remove it without causing any damage. There's quite a bit of rust falling off it. And it's off. Here we have the starter, and I've completely loosened it already, but we can't take it out that easily. You can clearly see it was just pressed to this solid piece of metal. One piece. Now we'll attempt to remove the starter. It's probably been there since the car was first assembled. It's held in by rust. So we'll take a small rubber mallet so that we don't damage it, and we can start pushing it out. So what do we have here, Zdeno? Well, here we have a collection of the engine accessories. There's the alternator and the AC compressor. There's the idler pulley. And here's the water pump pulley. We also have the belt tensioner, along with the belt itself. Many people confuse this accessory belt with the timing system. But be careful, this is just an accessory belt. The timing assembly is inside the engine. These are the basic accessories, and they can be found on almost any engine. Actually, many modern cars have even more things on the accessory belt. But that makes it really easy to maintain on this car. So, now that we have all the accessories off, but there's still the crank pulley, the water pump, and the timing cover. In this case, this engine uses a timing chain. It has this nice aluminum cover, which is sealed off against oil leaks. But as you can see, the seal is no longer in the best shape. And there's two main places where it can leak, either through the front main seal, or the joint where the timing cover and the oil pan meet. So, if you just want to change the timing chain, this all has to come off the engine to get access to it. Yeah, in order to change the timing chain in this engine, you need to disassemble everything with it up till now, plus the oil pan, the valve cover, and the whole timing cover. In most cars, you can replace the timing assembly while the engine is still in the car. And while this car is one of them, but since I've seen the state of the nuts and bolts, it could take many times longer to finish it with the engine in the car. That's also one of the reasons why timing assembly service is so expensive. It's always more demanding with the timing chain, because you also have to clean all the mating surfaces. It's also much more complicated. But when it comes to most engines that use timing belts, they are usually only covered by a piece of plastic. That's usually enough to keep them clean. Now we will try to remove the crank pulley, which we have loosened when the flywheel was still on the engine. It's more or less just sitting there at this moment, so we can take it off immediately. Here you can nicely see that the front main seal is damaged, especially if you look at the mating surface with the pulley. You can see the mark it left on the pulley. Now I have taken off the water pump, and just by looking at the water pump, you can see this engine was built back when people actually cared. The water pump propeller is still made of metal. In most newer cars, it was replaced for a plastic one. Most of the time, they're also driven electrically. But on here, there's just a simple O-ring seal, and the whole water pump is powered by the accessory belt. Now we've removed all the bolts that hold the oil pan. Most of the engines actually have a small spot on the oil pan, which makes it much easier to pry it off. So we'll see how that goes today. The oil pan is just made of sheet metal, so it's really easy to bend, especially when it was taken off once already. But I can see a bit too much sealant on here, so that might be our case. So, the spot is here, so let's try to pry it off. It's working. And it's free. When we were taking the engine out of the car, we took all the oil out by removing the oil pan bolt. But just look in here. Look how much engine oil stayed in the engine. The same thing happens when you change your oil regularly. Usually, this much oil stays in the engine. Here we have the oil pump neck that's situated in the lowest point of the oil pan. That's where it takes the oil from to lubricate the whole engine. There's a small mesh screen inside it. That still looks pretty good. But now we also have to take it out, because Toyota included the oil pump into the timing cover. So let's take it off to remove the timing cover. And after removing the oil pan, what's next? We'll take the valve cover off. So this is the first time we'll be seeing the inside of the head. There we can check the camshafts and the valve springs. We will also see the timing chain for the first time there. And after seeing that, we can make a good educated guess on the health of the engine. So, now that the valve cover is off, you can see the camshafts and the timing chain. It doesn't actually look that bad at all. Are the camshafts alright? I don't know that yet. We'll have to take them out and measure them individually. But the good news is, I'm not seeing any carbon buildup, which is really good news considering the mileage. I'm guessing the oil was changed on schedule. But we still have to take a look at the timing chain. I have loosened the timing chain tensioner. In this case, it's on the outside of the timing cover, held on by only 2 bolts. So we can slowly take it out. I can nicely see what position it was in for most of its life. There's a visible mark. This can actually tell you a lot about the condition of the timing chain. When the timing chain is brand new and it's not stretched out at all, the tensioner should be somewhere around this position. Here you can see it has moved by a few teeth. The timing chain is approximately halfway through its life cycle. So we've already removed the timing guides with the whole timing chain. Now it's time to remove the camshafts. On the intake cam, you can finally see the famous VVTi. It's basically just a variable intake timing. It's all controlled by oil pressure, and the VVTi rotates the cam by a few degrees, based on the timing needs of the engine. If you'd like to hear more about the VVTi technology, feel free to let us know in the comments. Maybe we'll make a video explaining the system in the future. So, now we'll loosen all the cam caps and remove the cams. And after that, we can pull the cylinder head. And then we can see how the pistons look. We're just a few steps away from complete disassembly. I've loosened all the cam caps in specified order, so now the cams are free to be taken out. For loosening these bolts, you'd ideally want to use a bigger breaker bar. But I like to use a small wrench for this job. It's harder to loosen them, but you can more easily feel whether the bolt is going to snap. I also really don't want to snap the bolt out of the block. So it's a bit more physically demanding, but it's definitely worth it. I genuinely broke a sweat right now, but all the 10 head bolts are loose now. Now we can take them all out and remove the cylinder head. Now that the cylinder head is off, what can you see? Well, as you mentioned, the head is off. First off, you see 4 pistons, the cylinder sleeves, and cylinders themselves. So, what do you say? Is the engine salvageable? Or do we have an issue here? Well, just by looking at them, I can see that the piston sleeves on 3rd and 2nd cylinder are pristine. It all looks really good. Now I'll gently rotate the crankshaft to get to the other pistons. And those actually look almost spotless as well. We'll get our final verdict once I measure all the tolerances. But so far, considering the mileage, this is incredible. It's almost unbelievable how good of a shape they're in. So we have to thank the previous owner for taking good care of it. Well, firstly, yeah, he took great care of it. But you can also see how robustly the engine was built. What I'm holding right now is the head gasket, which is made of 2 layers of steel. You can see that the sealing compound is completely fallen off, because it stayed on the head and the block. Here I can see some oil and coolant channels, but I can finally see all the valves. The 8 black intake valves and the 8 grey exhaust valves. You can also see based on this residue that the engine evidently burned some oil. The most probable cause for this are usually the valve stem seals. When they get worn out, there's a small gap between it and the valve stem, and the engine can push oil through that gap. Considering the state of the cylinders, it looks like the oil was leaking through the cylinder head, but I'll have to measure all the piston rings to make sure. Here you can see some carbon deposits. I have removed the crankshaft bearing cap on the first cylinder, and we can finally see the first crankshaft piston bearing. I can see some wear on the crankshaft bearing cap, because it's missing its top layer. But once again, considering the mileage of the engine, they are in fantastic shape. So that's it, everybody. We just finished disassembling the engine. Every single nut and bolt was removed, so what did we find out? Well, the biggest problem the engine had before was oil consumption. We found out that there were 2 problems: the valve stem seals and the piston rings. The latter of which are all covered with carbon, causing the piston rings to be seized. But thankfully, somehow, this didn't damage the cylinders. But it's not too bad. We'll just remove the carbon deposits and give the engine new piston rings. In some future episode, we'll also have to measure the crank, the pistons, the ovality of the cylinders, and the camshafts. Basically, every single part that was taken off the engine now will be measured whether it's in spec. So, we have good news, the engine is alright. It's not brutally destroyed, although it has done 310,000 kilometers. Of course, the repairs will cost some money, but I'm really happy it's not new engine money. I think this will be a top-notch engine when we're done. See you in the next episode. See ya!